Hi, my name is Kristen Chrisman, and this is the second video in the grand finale of my Applying Paradigm for Peace to the Ukraine conflict. And in these 5 videos, I'm going over the entire model. So this video is about the aggressive roots of violence. And as I showed in the last video, I have this chart in which we're looking at 5 of the 7 roots of violence in my Paradigm for Peace model. We look at life and safety, power and freedom, wealth, land and possessions, values and identity, love, worth and friendship. And for the aggressive roots of violence, we look at it from the point of view of Russia, Putin and the allied Ukrainians, and the US, NATO and allied Ukrainians. So this group and this group. Now, frankly, I don't have anything to fill in up here, okay? Because, frankly, I don't know what the aggressive roots of violence are in Russia. Perhaps somebody else could fill that in, okay? I'm not denying that they exist, because certainly there's aggressive types everywhere. But as an American, I can more readily see what's going on in my own country's government. So I'm going to talk about the aggressive roots of violence in U.S. government, in the U.S., NATO, and allied Ukrainians. The first of these, we're going to look at the category called life and safety. How is the U.S. and its allies behaving in a way that they're trying to deprive others of life, and illegitimately so? And this is the card I made, and I realize you can't read it that well. I'll type it up. You know, this isn't really probably not that effective, having these charts that I made, but I kind of just wanted to give the idea that you can organize it all in this way, you know, and you can put it on a computer if you want with PowerPoint. I just prefer, I get so sick of the computer, and I like using paper and pens and scissors sometimes, you know. I can think better that way instead of always having my eyes on the computer. So I made these charts, but I'll read them to you. So the first, these aren't exactly roots of violence, but they're aggressive symptoms. Symptoms of aggressive behavior in the U.S. That's a better way to put it. The first of these is NATO expansion into Slavic lands. I mean, to me, to a lot of people, that was ridiculous, how NATO agreed not to move beyond Germany, and then it did. Into all sorts of Slavic lands, and now even into former republics of the Soviet Union. You trying to get into, or cooperating, NATO's been cooperating with Ukraine and Georgia. Weapons shipments, sabotaging Minsk agreements. So here, Russia, Ukraine, and a few European nations had worked out the Minsk agreements, non-violent solution to the problem. And to my awareness, the U.S. government didn't support these agreements. They just kept sending weapons. And when you send weapons, it kind of has a way of sabotaging the non-violent efforts, you know. Another aggressive symptom is noted in PNAC's document. PNAC is the Project for a New American Century. Now, they no longer exist as a group, but they had other groups that followed them, and also their members are still very much a part of the government or influencing the government. And PNAC, Project for a New American Century, wrote a document in 2000 with extremely aggressive ideas in it. And here, this is just one example. They were really excited about bioweapons to attack specific genotypes. To me, that sounds like genocide. You know, they're trying to create a biological weapon to kill people with a certain type of DNA. It also sounds stupid, as if that won't ever mutate, you know. But that is totally racist, and the entire document reeks of aggression. It glorifies in it. And then there's ultranationalist violence within Ukraine against the Romani, gypsies, Russians, Jews, gays, and feminists. And this is all trivialized by the U.S. media and policymakers. But it's been documented. I mean, human rights groups have documented this. This isn't just... It's just so annoying how the U.S. media, U.S. mainstream media really has a big role to play in escalating this conflict. They could have done a lot to prevent it, to help it. They're making it so much worse. The U.S. mainstream media. You can point your finger right at them, you know, if you're angry about this conflict. They trivialize all of this, but it's true. So, there's ultranationalist violence against these groups. Then we go to the category power and freedom. How is the U.S. government behaving aggressively in terms of power and freedom? And this is very big chart here, and I'll read it to you. The first thing is called, I have down here, the Wilsonian triad. Michael Mandelbaum writes about this in this book called The Ideas That Conquered the World: Peace, Democracy, and Free Markets. And those three things, peace, democracy, and free markets, he says, are the Wilsonian triad that Woodrow Wilson believed in, and that he thought the three items needed each other in order to survive. The democracy and peace need free markets. Okay, and I talk about this in a really recent essay. I think it's essay R, 4R. But that is actually a very aggressive belief that we have to spread democracy in the shallow term of it. We have to spread free markets around the world in order for there to be peace. Another aggressive move: kick Russia out of Europe's... Wait a minute. I thought this... Yeah, I'm reading the wealth one. I should have... Let me back up, okay? I have the wrong one. This is power and freedom. This is power and freedom, okay? So let's go to the PNAC document of 2000. Again, reeking with aggression, especially in terms of domination. If you read this document, it's called Rebuilding America's Defenses, written in 2000. They talk about U.S. hegemony, how the U.S. should set the rules, how the open oceans are America's, how the bases all around the Pacific are the new American frontier. Very aggressive, and they seem to glorify in this aggression. Barnett's book called Pentagon's New Map, Thomas Barnett, I write about this in the essay 4R, where I talk about the U.S.-led rules-based order. He talks about enforcing and imposing globalization around the world using the core, what he calls the functioning core nations rule set. Very aggressive. NATO expansion. Aggressive. NATO is not to defer to the EU. PNAC wrote something similar to that. They said they warned that NATO should never step back and not let the EU have more power than NATO, and because NATO has the U.S. in it. The U.S. policymakers want their voice. It's as if the U.S. thinks it's part of Europe, or it thinks Europe's a part of the U.S. NED, that's NED, National Endowment for Democracy, and CIA coup instigation, and then coups in Ukraine and Georgia. These are all extremely aggressive moves on the part of the U.S. government. And the U.S. government never sees its behavior as aggressive. I think it always sees itself as a victim trying to protect itself by expanding. Then the fact that we don't have any democratic referenda with regard to globalization. Like Barnett says, we should just spread it. That's how you create democracy. Well, if you have democracy, you should be able to vote about whether you want globalization or not. Again, free markets. Mandelbaum says you should just spread it. That's how you promote democracy. Well, shouldn't you vote about it? And there's all different variations of free markets. There's all different types of economic systems. Why can't we talk about all the varieties? Why is it always thought of that, oh, it's either free markets or you're a communist and you're a heathen or something. You're terrible. There's this fear of talking about variety in economic systems. No democratic referenda for war. We never get to vote about any war. Of course, the way we're brainwashed, if Americans were asked to vote on a war, I don't even know what they would say. Maybe they would vote for it because they're brainwashed. Or maybe they're smart and wouldn't swallow the propaganda. I don't know. But there should be complete thorough, impartial information given to Americans about a conflict. And if war is being proposed, it should be put to a referendum. Because our taxes are supporting that, for starters. What happened to no taxation without representation? It's ridiculous. And weapons. There's no democratic referenda regarding weapons manufacturing and weapons exports. Like all these billions of dollars of weapon shipments to Ukraine. We don't have a voice in that. We didn't even have a voice in the manufacture of these weapons. And another aggressive feature of the U.S. government is how freedom and democracy are redefined. You'll notice that freedom and democracy aren't about freedom and democracy. They're about whatever U.S. policymakers want. It's like they define, if they want something, then that's democratic. If they want something, then that's how you spread freedom. They just like plaster these little words onto whatever they want. Now we'll go to the category called wealth, land and possessions. So this is where the Wilsonian triad comes in. This makes more sense now. The idea of belief in that you have to spread free markets, or as I call them, unrestrained markets, in order to have peace and democracy. It's just a theory, and it's not a true theory, because forcing free markets on a country can be very hostile and violent. It doesn't make sense that that creates peace, and it certainly doesn't create democracy if you don't get to vote on it. Kicking Russia out of Europe's market. As I said, John D. Rockefeller tried doing this. First he was ruthless towards all his American competitors. I mean, really immoral towards them. Ruthless. And then he wanted to push Russia out of Europe's market. But Russia had discovered all this oil in Baku, and they were able to sell at a cheap price, and that made Rockefeller really mad. So he sold the oil cheap to Europe, then he sold it at high prices to the United States to make his money, because he didn't care about Americans. And then he spread rumors about Russia's oil safety to try to get that market. Well, the U.S. is still trying to get that market away from Russia, painting the image of Russia as the big bad wolf, and that it's dangerous to be dependent upon Russia. It's not dangerous to be dependent upon ExxonMobil, though. And then also aggressive behavior on the part of the U.S. government is securing access to fossil fuels of the Black and Caspian Seas. It's utterly ridiculous, and I guess it was during the Clinton administration. It was Clinton's idea, when the Soviet Union broke apart, to get right into that Caspian Sea and get hold of those fossil fuels and those pipelines. Trying for years to shut down Nord Stream 2. As I said, the U.S. media paints it as if, and the policymakers paint it as if, oh, we're shutting down Nord Stream 2 to punish you, Russia, because you were bad in invading Ukraine. Unprovoked. The big lie. Of course it was provoked. But they've been wanting to shut down Nord Stream 2 before it was even built, because they want the U.S. in that energy market. They say it's for Europe's benefit. They're doing it for their own profit. Then, coups, U.S.-supported coups, reportedly in Georgia and definitely in Ukraine, to secure U.S. ownership of pipelines and access to fossil fuels. Weapon industry profits from NATO expansion and weapon shipments. Bill Hartung writes about that in Profits of War, how pushing for NATO expansion across Europe was the weapon industry. And this rule that, new NATO members would have to get rid of their old Soviet weapons and buy the new stuff from Lockheed Martin and other weapon companies. So they were pushing for NATO expansion. And who do you think is pushing for all these weapon shipments? I mean, the weapon industry donates millions of dollars to the U.S. policymakers as campaign contributions, which are really bribes. So that's very aggressive behavior. U.S. policymakers and donors' financial interests in weapons and fossil fuels. I think it was Jeremy Scahill who said that reading the list of investors in the Caspian Sea fossil fuel business is like reading a list of the national security roster. like Kissinger and others in the national security establishment of the U.S. are all investing in these fossil fuels. So is that just a secondary thing, and they would, or is that, you have to think that that's somewhat influencing their decision that they want to control the fossil fuels there too, because it'll help their investments. And then you've got people like Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, who has his West Exec Advisors Group. And I wrote down, on Wikipedia, it said, it wasn't, so I'm not sure if this is valid or not, but it said that the clients included drone surveillance company, investment giants, pharmaceutical company, Boeing, AT&T. And when these top U.S. advisors have money interests that are very connected with the policies that they're advocating, it's not right because it's a conflict of interest. And for some reason, these conflicts of interest aren't recognized as conflicts of interest. I think they're recognized, they're thought of as like a dovetailing of interest, like, oh, these go together so nicely. But it's a submerging of interest. U.S. foreign policy, here's U.S. foreign policy, is being submerged to the interests of profit. And the same with Lloyd Austin, Defense Secretary. He was on the board of Raytheon, with huge stock holdings there. Now again, he may say, that's not what's driving, I would take these policy choices anyway. And he might, okay? But it's still not right to have that conflict of interest like that. And apparently, Austin and Blinken are both also involved with Pine Island Capital, another investment company. And some of these investment companies are probably very interested in investing in Russia, too. Which is why I think they want to get their hands on Russia and Ukraine. This is just one example of Center for a New American Security. I mentioned this in the essay way back about the cultural script. It's a group that Victoria Nuland, who's Biden's Undersecretary of State, used to be I think the Chief Executive Officer of. But the Center for New American Security, its donors are a huge number of weapon industry companies are donors. Also high-tech companies. ExxonMobil's a donor. And you got to think that those donors must be influencing the Center for New American Security and Victoria Nuland. It's just very disappointing, and I write about this in a lot of my essays, how you've got the same kind of greed, the same kind of mentality doing U.S. foreign policy. You don't have a different heart and spirit and mind in there. And that's leading to the problems we have now. And as I said, Center for a New American Security sounds an awful lot like Project for a New American Century, which is the organization that Victoria Nuland's husband was a founder of. Then we move on to values and identity. And I think the U.S. is actually, the government is very aggressive in pushing its values. There's different types of values that are pushed. There's religious values that are pushed by certain groups in government. There's commercial values. There's cultural values. Thomas Barnett's book called Pentagon's New Map, which I write about in Essay 4R, again, talks about imposing globalization worldwide with war if needed for their own good and with the ultimate goal of peace. So he believes that if all these nations that are already globalized, he calls them the functioning core nations, exist. And then all along the borders of the functioning core nations and the non-globalized, which he calls the non-integrated gap, he says along that border is where the U.S. military should be fighting. So this is the new mission he's giving to the Pentagon, and he's hoping this will give the Pentagon like a new breath of life, a new purpose in life, to fight along that border. And his book's been popular in the Pentagon. But his idea is, we've got to push this globalization, non-violently if possible, but with war if need be, in order for everyone to be happy so that we can live in peace. Where's the logic? And we have to have these wars so that we can live in peace. You know, once we kill off all the people who don't want globalization, we'll be in peace. It doesn't make sense. It's very aggressive, and it's the same mentality that drove the U.S. government to stampede across the Native Americans. Then there's exported values to the trade and entertainment industry. And there's no sense of, you know, within the United States, there's this very permissive attitude of, they call it free speech. They don't think about the freedom not to hear or see certain things. The freedom not to be around other people influenced by things that they've seen. They just think everything should just be permissive, and then they want to spread that permissiveness to other countries without... It's enough that it's like that here, but why can't they respect other nations who maybe have different standards? Privatization and austerity imposed as conditions of receiving World Bank and IMF loans. Now this could have gone under the wealth page, but for starters I didn't have room on that chart, so I put it here. But also, when the World Bank and IMF impose privatization and austerity, they are imposing a set of values. Austerity imposes a certain value set of not caring about the middle class and the poor. And privatization brings in the whole U.S. commercial and business scene with all their values. Then I question marks here. Religious motives, Final Judgment Day fans. I know with the U.S. Mideast conflict, that's part of it driving it in the... I mean, on different fronts. You've got Muslim fundamentalist extremists who might want Final Judgment Day, Jewish fundamentalist extremists who might want Final Judgment Day, and Christian fundamentalist extremists. And some of these people all want Final Judgment Day to come, and they can't wait for this holy war to get started. So I don't know if any of that is also involved in this fight against Russia. Certainly during the Cold War, Russia was put down as this godless, atheist country, as if the U.S. were really proving its morality by killing. So I don't know if that's taking part in this conflict or not, but it could be. And then last of all, love, friendship, and worth. How is that being aggressive? What aggressive behaviors do we see there in the U.S. government? Well, we see this with us or against us idea. I mean, Bush said that with 9/11. But it's happening now, where no neutrality is allowed. That is a very aggressive form of friendship. You prove your friendship by not being friends with them, only being friends with me. And you have to be a part of this conflict. You can't be neutral either. You've got to prove your friendship by siding with me. That's an aggressive, demanding form of friendship. Demanding military support is proof of friendship. That's another thing. The U.S. is doing that, and Zelensky is doing that. They get all upset if countries are refusing to send weapons to Ukraine. Compelling Ukraine to create alliances only with the EU, U.S., and NATO, and to sever alliances with Russia. Oh, I forgot to hold that up closer to you. Not that you can read it, but just in case you can. And I don't know if I held this one up too, the values one. And I'll show these again on the 5th video, and I'll type them up. Yeah, forcing Ukraine to just be friends with the West and not with Russia. Again, a very demanding, very jealous form of friendship. And you wonder, what's in the psychology of these U.S. policymakers that they're so jealous like that? Is that part of our culture? Like, do we see that even in school? Do we see that amongst kids and or other people? Like, yeah, you like me, but don't like them. You know, it's a sickness. Blacklisting. This is horrendous. And again, and it goes with this unity. Defining unity as forced homogenization. So this forced homogenization of views being placed upon Americans who differ in viewpoint from the propaganda machine, which might be headed up by the CIA, probably is. Say Scott Ritter, Diane Sayre, Roger Waters, formerly of Pink Floyd, they've all been blacklisted for saying things like what I say that shows that Putin has said something right, that he said something reasonable, that he said something good, that he's not all bad. Just for saying that, these people are blacklisted, and they're called, as Scott Ritter said, they're called information terrorists, which is a very dangerous word because terrorists are just killed. They're called Russian propagandists, as if no one would stand up for Russia except for some malicious, false propagandist. And it's all backwards, because the propaganda is completely being spewed out by the New York Times. It's disgusting how it's just dripping with propaganda. And then this blacklisting, like, no, you're not a friend, you're not a patriot, that patriot idea, unless you stand up for us through truth and through lies. You know, through our kindness and through our killing. You have to show, Americans, you have to show that you will stand by your U.S. policymakers and serve us. That's a very demanding form of friendship and of citizenship. It's shameful. Then a sense of self-worth dependent upon winning rivalries and making profits. I see this as a problem within the U.S. policymaker establishment. I'm thinking that it's probably a big part of their culture. And that's why they think, oh, we got to get these, and also within the corporations, like fossil fuels. We got to get our fossil fuel company in before some other fossil fuel company gets in there. Because, yeah, we won, we beat them. Whether it's another American fossil fuel company or a Russian fossil fuel company, we got to make that win so that, to show that we're worth something. We've got to make profits to show that I'm worth something. This is also it's a sickness, because your worth should not depend upon your winning a rivalry or you're making increasing amounts of money or just more money. It should have nothing to do with money, your worth. It should have a lot more to do with your ability to care about people. So that's a real, I'll pause right here to say, when we look at aggressive roots of violence, whether it's in Americans or in terrorists or Russians, it's when you find them, or aggressive symptoms, it's not an excuse to say, oh, they're aggressive, we can nail them, let's kill them. No, it's a sign that your solution has to be very careful. Yeah, you have to be careful of them, because if they're aggressive, you can't trust how they're going to be thinking. But they likely have suffered from some form of trauma themselves, or some type of skewed psychology or skewed psychological culture. Like this greed, this rivalry, this thirst for profit. That's not an excuse to go kill U.S. policymakers. But we really got to publicly talk about this problem. And I think there are some people who've talked about their past greed. I forget what book it was. Maybe it was Sarah Shea's book about corruption in America, I think, where she quoted somebody who used to be involved with investments. And then he said, yeah, you know, my $3 million salary, you know, wasn't good at all when it compared with, like, this other guy's $6 million salary. So this rivalry, even though he's getting these aren't the exact figures, but even though he was getting, say, $3 million, it wasn't enough because this person was getting $6 million. So that rivalry was in there, and that's a very sick part of the culture. I mean, you can kind of understand it too, how you feel unfair. It's unfair if this person's making more than me, but there's a sickness going on there that has to be addressed, and the greed has to be addressed, and with compassion, not just with sneers. I mean, get these people out of power. You don't want them making the policy decisions, but you don't condemn them and throw rotten eggs at them or something. We have to address this publicly. So when you look at these aggressive symptoms in the U.S., they've got to be treated dynamically, but with compassion and very seriously. And same again, I wasn't purposely trying to leave off aggressive symptoms in Russia, but I don't see them and I don't know what they are. So other people can fill that part of the chart in if they want to, you know, and talk about it. Especially people in Russia. They might be much more familiar with what's aggressive within Russia or within Putin. Okay? And last of all, on this love, friendship, and worth chart, the Pentagon's and NATO's need for purpose and self-worth satisfied with enlarged missions of violence, conquest, and intimidation. And that's something Thomas Barnett writes about, again, that he thought his, that the military, the Pentagon's been suffering from a lack of purpose since the end of the Cold War, the quote, end of the Cold War. And that the Persian Gulf War kind of came along right when they needed a boost. Like, oh, this is just awful. They shouldn't be thinking about, oh, good, another war. We have purpose now. You know, they should feel that as the need for war goes down, great, there's less of a need for our military purpose. We're doing our job well. Just like a fireman. He doesn't want to have more and more fires just to feel good. He shouldn't be setting fires. You want to feel good if people are preventing fires, right? So it's the same here. You can kind of understand it, how they want a sense of purpose and self-worth, but we have to change that, give them a different sense of purpose and self-worth. And that is the end of the aggressive roots of violence, and I'll put them on this chart like this. They'll all be lined up on the bottom of here. They'll be all along here, and I'll make a poster of that. So thank you very, very much for listening, and I really hope you get the message too that I think that there's a lot of U.S. aggressive government behavior going on, and I think it's needs public attention, serious, dynamic. It has to happen now, and with compassion. And I think we got to get other types of minds and hearts and spirits in there to help change the culture within the U.S. foreign policy making establishment. So thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for your comments. And please, if you like this or like some of it and want to modify it, please send the video along or the channel link along to 10 people if you can, and ask them to send it along to 10 people and so forth. Because we've got to show, it doesn't have to be my model paradigm for peace that takes over, but just to show that there are alternatives, something like this, something along these lines, something along the lines of this nice impartial analysis where you're looking at both sides, you're really trying to get into shoes, even the shoes of those with aggressive behaviors, in order to solve the problems deeply. So thank you very, very much. And please subscribe if you're interested, and you can click on that notification bell so that you'll get notices when I have more videos. Okay? Thanks very, very much for your time, and good night.